All right, guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this, an LWRC M6 IC-A5 chambered in 5.56. Now, in order to talk about this rifle, we're going to have to talk about a little bit of history before we get into its features as well as its cost and that cost-benefit evaluation. Now, in 2010, the United States Army decided to launch the Individual Carbine Program, or IC program, in order to be able to check and see if there was anything out on the market that effectively was better than the M4 carbine. There was a lot of grumblings at the time that the direct gas impingement system was broken and that external gas piston was the way of the future, and anything that wasn't utilizing that was garbage. So the United States Army invited a lot of premium manufacturers to supply a rifle meeting their specifications for testing. LWRC, being a very young company at the time, did contribute a rifle. However, they were an early dismissal from the program. Not because their rifle was bad or they did anything wrong, because they were a small company. And there was a concern that if awarded a contract, the massive infusion of cash that would be required to be able to bring their factory up to the level of being able to produce weapons for the United States military would cause delays in either quality control issues or any other number of type of issue that happens whenever someone rapidly expands. And if you look at a lot of major manufacturers, SIG, it's not uncommon to see that kind of thing happen with someone that has a more established factory, let alone a small shop. However, it ultimately didn't matter, because in 2013, the United States Army declared the IC program complete because there was nothing better effectively than the M4. That's not to say that the M4 was good. It's just to say that there was nothing that beat it well enough, showed a technological advantage enough over the weapon system to constitute the effort and cost associated with rearming the military. Now, LWRC would take this dismissal on the chin. They'd go ahead and they would market that rifle. That would be the IC-A2. And they would also find some acceptance amongst law enforcement contracts and would actually get pretty lucrative out of that. They would come along with a couple of different advancements, and eventually the end user would start making some requests, specifically that the 12-inch rail from the LWRC SPR and the adjustable gas system from the IC Enhanced be combined on one rifle, and that is where we are today. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this rifle specifically. We have a 16.1 inch barrel. It's also made in a 14.7, and you can special order down to 10.5. This has an A2 flash hider on the front. Pretty standard, honestly. And for most people, this is more or less just a placeholder. It's like a thread protector, a glorified thread protector. You'll see that our barrel is spiral fluted, which is pretty fantastic from the standpoint of giving this a thicker overall cross section while having a 20% reduction in weight over a standard bull barrel. This is super cool. I really like this, and it's actually establishing a good theme. This is a 4150 chrome moly barrel. It is NiCOR treated and a 1-in-7 twist. Now, coming back to here, you'll see that we have two thumb screws in the front of the handguard here, and that is so upon removal you can take off the top of your handguard and be able to service the gas piston system. I actually really like this. I like being able to see the whole thing instead of having to drop it down and watch it disappear into the unknown whenever it is that you're working around with gas piston guns. This is pretty cool. It's a self-regulating gas system. We have our adjustment here in the front, which is for suppressed and unsuppressed settings, which is kind of like a yes, well, not so much a yes-no, I guess like a yes type deal. Now, this is a 12-inch rail, and you'll note that it has these holes in the side, and this is so you can attach Picatinny rail sections, as many as you want, as will fit in these holes. And this is very interesting. Now, when it comes to Picatinny, Keymod, and M-LOK, I really don't get too broken up in arguing about it. I have all three systems. I like all three systems just fine. It does seem that M-LOK has kind of won the market here currently, but one of the things that I appreciate about this scalable system here is that I'm not stuck with a quad rail, because quad rail for Picatinny is quite heavy. This, I can just go ahead and add the rail sections that I want. This actually came with 2 rail sections. And I do wish the rail sections were a little shorter because I don't need this much rail, But, I mean, I guess you take the good with the bad on this one. Now, you'll note here that I have a Surefire M600 Scout. This is the dual fuel setup, and I have the rechargeable battery in it right now. I'm running a clicky tail right now because I've been super stuck on the concept of light negligent discharges, and I decided that I want to start running clicky caps pretty much solely. I still have some pressure pad setups, but moving forward, I'm probably mostly going to run clicky caps. Now, this rifle also came with this QD cup, which attaches in the same way that the rails do, and I appreciate that immensely. It also came with a front side adjustment tool. We'll talk about that more here in a minute. Now, you'll note that we have a lot of lightning cuts in this handguard, which this gives me a little bit of pause, specifically these right here, because this is direct access to the gas piston system, and I'm somewhat concerned that ingress of foreign material might in some way choke this up. There's also a lot of space for things to fall out, and I could see that still working out just fine for it. The truth of the matter is, I'm not going to take this out into a swamp and like spike it in the ground or something like that, because I buy these guns with my own money. These are my guns. I take care of them and treat them like they're my guns, so I'm not going to needlessly go abuse it. Now, if you are not opposed to that type of thing, you have one of these and you want to test whether or not that's going to cause malfunctions, I invite you to do so, and then hit me up in the comments, let me know how it is, and whenever I do an update on this gun, we'll talk about it then. Now, you'll note my sling here is a cheapo Amazon Bungie Sling. I just had this lying around, threw it on just to get the rifle off the bench and in the game. Now, you'll see our barrel nut attachment here. This is super solid lockup. This is going absolutely nowhere. We have Picatinny running across the top of the rail system all the way across the top of the rifle. It is T-marked, for those of you who find that important. Sitting on top, I have a Vortex Spark Ar with a 2 MOA red dot. I actually really like this setup primarily because it runs off of a AAA battery, which is super nice. I like, it's not got the best battery life in the world, but I really like the availability and accessibility of AAA batteries as opposed to the really weird like N types that I have with other setups. Now let's talk about this sight setup real quick. This rifle came with LWRC's Skirmish Sites. Now, a lot of manufacturers anymore are not providing iron sights, and that's because they claim that the end user most of the time disregards their iron sights and puts their own on there, so why even bother? And to some extent, I understand that overall thought process. However, these are exceedingly high quality metal locking folding sights that kind of have a little bit of like an HK feel to them. I don't foresee anybody throwing these away. These aren't your plastic Magpul M-Bus sights or anything like that. Ooh, got a little American flag right there too. But like these are not cheap sights. These are $200 sights on their website, and they're good. They're exceedingly good. Now, this rear sight also has the ability to be able to select 2 different apertures. It rotates so that you have your wide and your small aperture available to you. These are a definite sustain, and in general, I appreciate a manufacturer who gives me so many opportunities to just take this thing straight to the range, as opposed to having to order all these parts and additional costs and all that kind of stuff. Like, sure, I could possibly get it cheaper than going through the manufacturer, but I also really appreciate being able to go, here, take it, go do your thing, go get it zeroed up or whatever it is that you need to do. And to each their own on that one, I guess. That's just how I assess that overall. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this upper. We have a LWRC produced ambidextrous charging handle. Nice and oversized, very easy to grip and get a hold of. We have a dust cover, which I would consider, especially at this price point, to be kind of a standard thing, but some people like to omit them for some reason. I don't understand why. I like anything that keeps the possibility of ingress of foreign material out of the weapon system. Now, you could say, well, as soon as you start shooting, it's open. Well, I mean, yeah, it has to be open in order to be able to eject the spent casings. That's duh. But whenever it's not shooting, I close it, and then that makes sure that the weapon system is staying clean in times when I'm not actively fighting with it. just something to think about overall. We have a brass deflector. This is another thing that a lot of people will tend to omit in order to have a more streamlined setup, cut a little bit of weight off of it. However, this is an example, in my opinion, of good weight. Specifically, especially if you're switching between shoulders or you have a left-handed person in the family like I do, you benefit from having a brass deflector. Now, we also have a forward assist, and the forward assist is very much so a hotly debated topic in firearms communities. I'm a big fan of the forward assist. Most of the time, whenever you argue with someone about forward assist, the first thing they say is like, when have you ever used a forward assist? And I've used it quite a bit, actually. I used it fairly recently, so I don't know where we go next on this argument. The whole thing about the forward assist is that there's a time and a place. It's not a reset button for your gun. It's not going to automatically fix your jam just because you pressed the forward assist. Most of the time that I use the forward assist is in administrative type functions. I have conducted a press check. The bolt did not go all the way into battery for whatever reason. I pressed my forward assist, and now I know the weapon's going to go bang when I pull the trigger. And that's really what's important here at the end of the day. So just something to consider overall. If you've actually got debris or something like that in the weapon system, touching the forward assist is not going to change that, and it could potentially exacerbate the overall problem. But if you're just doing some simple stuff, and like I say, there's a time and a place for all things, there's not a whole lot of reason to not go ahead and mash on a forward assist. I benefit more from its presence than I do from its absence. All right, we have ambidextrous bolt hold open device, which I actually really appreciate, not from a tactical use, but from, again, an administrative type function. Whenever you're on a range at a competition or a class or something like that, you need to show clear, there's less weapons manipulation involved with having an ambidextrous bolt release. I actually really appreciate that. I think this is a very nice touch. I also have an ambidextrous magazine release on either side of the rifle, and this is a very spacious magazine release for sure. I also have an ambidextrous safety with a short throw on the offside for me. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about a lot of these ambidextrous features more here after a little bit. Now, as it turns out, the trigger is also ambidextrous, in case you didn't know. This is actually their NiCOR treated 2-stage trigger. This, of course, is a proprietary lower to LWRC. All these ambidextrous features are not something that you're just going to find from be able to resource from just any manufacturer. We have a slightly enlarged trigger well. We have an LWRC designed grip that looks very similar to a Magpul grip. However, it has these kind of rubbery sections here. I don't get too caught up on grips, honestly. There's two things that I look for in grips. One is not having an M16A2 bump, and second is having a more vertical angle to the actual grip. As you can see, this doesn't meet that second expectation. However, it is comfortable overall. Now these rifles are rolling out with actual Magpul grips on them. This rifle's a little older. Now in the bottom of this, we do have a compartment for storing batteries, skittles, or in this case, charging cables to your flashlight. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this thing's bolt for a second. Now, of course, we have M4 feed ramps and all that kind of stuff. I find, set that down for a second, I find gas piston bolt carrier groups exceedingly interesting. So, right off the bat, of course, we don't have a gas key because we don't have gas coming back into the bolts of the weapon system. What we have is a monolithic design bolt, which is great. I love monolithic bolt carriers in general. And the biggest thing that you have to take into consideration about gas piston guns in relation to their bolt carrier is the possibility for carrier tilt. Now that happens because the piston rod comes back, strikes this portion here, and if you don't have a consistent contact with that bolt carrier, it might cause the front of it to rise, the bottom of it to dip, and then that is going to scrape against the receiver extension as it moves back into the buffer tube. This is potentially causing damage. It's not a good thing to have happen. It's a great concern, carrier tilt is. What this bolt has done is it has put a dished cut into the section of the bolt carrier that interacts with the piston rod, which is supposed to give it a better, more consistent contact with that piston rod against the bolt carrier and diminish the possibility of carrier tilt. Now, in addition to that, we also have this wider section on the rear of the bolt carrier, which is supposed to, again, help with getting that consistent contact in with the buffer tube. Now, another thing that's kind of interesting about the bolt carriers in external gas piston guns is that in internal gas piston guns, you have gas rings that go around the end of the bolt. And that is, of course, to operate in the overall gas system, all that kind of stuff. And one of the ways that you can tell as to whether or not you're having issues with your gas rings is if you hold a bolt upright and it falls into the bolt carrier, then your gas rings are toast, you need new gas rings. But you don't have gases coming back into the bolt carrier group on an external gas piston gun. So how do you keep the bolt from coming back? Now, some manufacturers don't worry about it at all. Other manufacturers put a little spring on it. LWRC decided to just stick with gas rings, which I find kind of interesting. They look a little thicker, but I haven't really measured them one way or the other to be able to tell the difference. Now, of course, as we can see, this is also a NiCOR treated bolt. And as you'd kind of expect with external gas piston guns, this thing doesn't get dirty at all. And any dirt that does get on it, any residual powder left in the chamber or something like that, just falls right off. You pretty much just clean this with a napkin and you're good to go. I really like this finish. I really like this bolt. Now, you'll also note that we have QD cups right underneath the mil-spec buffer tube. We, of course, have a staked castle nut, and then let me get my wish.com Ranger band out of the way. And then we also have QD cups set in this buttstock, which is a LWRC designed buttstock. Now, as you can see in profile, it's kind of similar to a SOP mod, but it's not nearly as drastic in angle on the cheek weld here, which I really appreciate. I never cared for the cheek weld on the SOP mod stock. And then it's also kind of got the smaller overall profile, which makes it pretty easy to get into the shoulder with body armor or something like that, which I really appreciate. All right, guys, so there's our features, and it's definitely a feature-rich rifle. How does it shoot? Well, I'll go ahead and I'll roll in some pictures of the target because I totally forgot to bring it upstairs with me, and I do these in one take. So the very first cold bore group I shot today was with 55 grain Tula FMJ, steel cased ammunition. And something to keep in mind, guys, this is a 1-in-7 twist barrel, which will stabilize 55 grain ammunition, but it will not get the best accuracy out of it. And that was definitely displayed with the Tula ammo today, where I got a 4 1/8 inch grouping out of this rifle, which is honestly not that impressive. I'm actually a little disappointed. This is at 100 yards, of course. Now, I also brought out some 62 grain ammunition because that is supposed to be better mated with 1-in-7 twists. And with that 62 grain Aguila FMJ, I managed to pull off a 3 5/8 inch group. which is looking a little bit better. It's definitely better than 4 1/8, but it's not as good as it could be. Or was it 4 1/4? You guys have seen the picture by now. Sorry if I got it wrong. Now, a friend of mine was out at the range with me, and he brought along some of his 62 grain hand loads that he runs out of all of his AR-15s. And I threw these in this rifle, again a 62 grain FMJ load, and I managed to get a 2 5/8 group out of this rifle, which is the best grouping I've gotten yet. That's what we're looking at now. Keep in mind, guys, I'm running a red dot. All right, this is set up as a fighting rifle for me, and the accuracy that I'm getting out of it is fighting rifle accuracy. I'm completely fine with that. It's shooting minute of man. And Tula is not particularly consistent or good ammo to begin with, so I'm not too worried about that either. Now, if you look up a lot of the print media and all that kind of stuff, tons of people have gotten 1 MOA groups out of this gun. However, they've gotten 1 MOA groups with like 3 to 9 power scopes and shooting it out of a rifle rest and all that kind of stuff. They are not talking about how you are probably, or may, I'm not going to say probably, how you may configure this rifle and actually take it out to the range. I could throw a more powerful scope on here and we could sit here and stress out about all the subtle nuances of grouping and all that kind of stuff, but this is an example of what I'm getting out of this rifle with this practical setup and how it is that I'm actually going to run it in real life. Now, for shooting wise, I did run into a little bit of an issue when I first got the rifle, and that was consistent last shot hold open. I didn't have it. I had about 50-50 last shot hold open depending on what magazines I was using. If I was using GI mags, it was roughly 50-50. If I used Magpul mags, it was almost every time. And I was very confused because it wasn't a gassing issue by any means. The ejection was crisp and at the expected direction and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't seeing anything that indicated that I wasn't getting full travel of the bolt, and I could easily lock back on GI magazines whenever I manually locked the bolt to the rear. So it was almost like I was just missing the catch with the steel mags. Now I took the rifle out today and I ran 40-50 rounds through it with a wide variety of magazines. I mean, black followers, green followers, tan followers. I've got an old Vietnam era 20 round magazine and a Magpul. And I had no issues with lockback today. So it would appear that the rifle has broken in overall. And that's not unusual to see in premium rifles or weapon systems in general. Sometimes those tolerances be so tight you gotta kind of work them in a little bit. However, it's kind of regrettable. And I'm glad that it kind of worked itself out in fairly short order. However, it's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow whenever you have to spend this amount of money on this rifle and then follow that up with the now not insignificant infusion of cash that it would take to be able to quote unquote break the set. Now, it's not like it took 500 rounds, but there are a lot of manufacturers producing a much cheaper rifle that works right out of the box. So, something to consider there. Now, I've alluded to it a couple of times. How much does this thing cost? Presently, the MSRP for this rifle is $2,700. That is not cheap. So what are we getting for that? And what is this rifle doing that something like this Ruger AR-556, previously reviewed, isn't? I'll throw the link in the description for this rifle. What is this going to do that this does not? Well, features-wise, this rifle did not come fully ambidextrous, and it has a 4140 barrel, and it doesn't have, it had the original like plastic, no heat shield, handguard, and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of a bare bones rifle for a significantly diminished overall cost. But is that a bad thing? Because I've been able to add all of these additions to this rifle and still have not come anywhere near the cost of this one. So what have I really gained? Well, let's talk about the ambidextrous features, because I actually set this is the wife's rifle, and I actually set this up for her with her in mind, since it's her gun, because she's left-handed, and I wanted to give her a lot more left-handed adaptability to the rifle. So I added in a whole bunch of stuff, magazine release. I added in this Troy version of the Magpul bad lever to help assist in the process of locking the bolt to the rear and all that kind of stuff. And she actually stopped me short of putting an ambidextrous safety on this, because what she told me was, that she's literally spent all of her time training and working around right-handed guns. It's become very natural for her to use this support hand, her firing hand, to manipulate a safety in the same way that I do whenever I work a left-handed gun. And I've been working AR-15s personally and professionally my entire adult life. I have trained around just right-handed setup guns for a lot of that. So for me, whenever I transition shoulders and I have to manipulate my safety, it's very natural for me to come back. Stop that. For me to come back and engage the safety with this hand. It doesn't slow me down at all. It doesn't cause me, look at that, I used the forward assist. It doesn't cause me any issues. So I don't consider having ambidextrous features on a rifle to necessarily be all that important, especially when you're talking about your average shooter who's already been training around right-handed guns. So are the right-handed aspects of this rifle really that important? The topic is up for debate, that's for sure. Well, what about the trigger and all that kind of stuff? I got a coated trigger and all that kind of stuff. It's got to be pretty good, right? No, it's not. This trigger with its NiCOR treatment feels like somebody covered the mating surfaces with butter in order to smooth it out. So I'm really not that impressed with the trigger, if I got to be 100% honest. Well, it's not a 1 MOA rifle, and it's not got a super nice trigger in it. What am I paying over $2,000 for? Well, keep in mind that the vast majority of the parts on this rifle are in-house made. Pretty much everything on this rifle is made by LWRC. They're not sourcing their parts from whomever, which might be more common with a lot of your more budget AR-15s. So what you're getting for that cost is all of the research and development into a lot of these proprietary parts, these individual parts. It has to be recouped somehow. So that's what you're paying for with this rifle. Now, what am I getting for that though? Well, you get all these ambidextrous things, which if you're somebody who's not been training around right-handed guns only, be it a left-handed person or even a right-handed person at that point, if you're someone who's fairly new to the AR-15 platform, you haven't played around with it that much, you would get a lot of use out of ambidextrous stuff if that's what you trained on. If that's what your introduction was and you weren't trying to get rid of old training scars to be able to focus your training around the possibilities that this rifle brings you. Because, like I say, all right, cool. It's got an ambidextrous safety on it, right? About the closest I've got to embracing the ambidextrous aspect of the safety is using this hand to turn it off. If you put me under pressure, shooting off of my left shoulder, I am going to default to doing this. Pretty much 10 out of 10. I haven't trained around that much on using the safety itself. That's where my neural pathway is built. That's just how it's going to go until I have more time training on rifles like this that have ambidextrous capabilities. There's really not a whole lot going around that. And that's going to be the same with magazine changes or bolt releases and all that kind of stuff. The really only advantage I find for this is administrative type checks and all that kind of stuff. Probably the same with the magazine release, honestly, though it's not that hard to come up with my trigger finger and do that same thing. Now, what do you get for that proprietary aspect? Well, in theory, you should get the long welcomed reliability of the external gas piston system, and you also get a fairly lightweight gas piston gun. This, as it is outfitted, weighs 7.4 pounds, which is exactly the same weight as my go-to rifle previously reviewed on the channel. My CBC upper with a Spikes Tactical lower. This rifle weighs the same as this rifle. The weight distribution's a little different because they're heavy in different areas, but that's pretty good because I love the weight and profile of this rifle. And as much as it's a little more front heavy with that heavier barrel and then also that gas piston system, I really like working around this rifle as well. I really appreciate it. And I think this is where that cost value kind of comes in at. to where you're not just getting another run-of-the-mill AR-15. You're getting something that's put together from the ground up to be excellent. And so far, last shot hold open notwithstanding, it's doing pretty good. Now, it's not entirely fair to say last shot hold notwithstanding, because like pretty much everything, if you go ahead and ignore the parts where it didn't do so good, did pretty good. So it's kind of a flawed logic right there, but now that it's worked that out, I'm really liking this rifle quite a bit. That's for sure. Now, what do I use this for? This is my premium AR entry in my collection. I wanted something at the higher end because I have mid-tier guns and I have budget-minded guns. So I wanted something all the way at the top to be able to kind of compare them against my other weapon systems. I'm going to continue. This is going to be a running review. At some point I'll do an update and we'll continue to revisit how I think this performs in comparison to these other two rifles, and more still that we haven't seen yet. Now, what I recommend you use this for. Cost and value are exceedingly subjective things. I'm not necessarily trying to make that decision for you. If you're somebody who goes out and just occasionally puts holes in paper, you only shoot at flat ranges and all that kind of stuff, something like this is going to work out just fine for you. It's still good enough to defend your life in any reasonable self-defense type scenario, and you'll have plenty of money left over to be able to get ammunition, accessories, all that kind of stuff. You can optimize this rifle out with the money that you'd save based off of what you would pay for this, and it'll probably meet all of your needs. 100%, that's kind of the bottom line in this case. However, if you're looking for something for a little bit harder use, competition gun, something that you take to classes because you train all the time, you have a place where you can run it dynamically and really get into the nitty-gritty of being able to work all these additional parts and all that kind of stuff, or are a professional who wants something that is reliable, end of the world reliable, this is a rifle worthy of your consideration. Now, one more thing on the safety. Something that kind of annoys me about ambidextrous safeties is I kind of got to make room for the ambidextrous aspect of the safety, which commonly makes me avoid them. It actually almost made me not get this, but it's pretty easy to work around. Like, that is an exceedingly easy workaround. I don't find it too difficult overall to be able to kind of just separate my finger just a little bit in order to let that by and then get back on it. It's not that much time overall, but that is why I don't like full-size ambidextrous safeties and will pretty much always avoid those. Even though it's something that's really easy to be able to change out, I'm not going to pay this much money and have parts that I want to change out. Now, I didn't pay $2,700 for this, but I definitely paid over $2,000 for it, and it has wrecked my gun fund. But I am pretty happy with the setup overall. The accessories that I put on it have kept the weight pretty low overall, and I appreciate that a lot. That's why these cuts and all this kind of stuff are in there, to really pare down that weight, and you get a lot of rifle for your trouble. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts. If you're interested in seeing videos on these other two rifles, I'll post the links in the description. But otherwise, have a good day.